All right, so today we're diving into a topic that always seems to spark a ton of opinions, private schools.
Yeah, always lots to unpack there.
We're going to go beyond those stereotypes and rumors, the kind of stuff you see in movies and TV shows, to try and uncover what the experience is really like.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at a podcast episode called The Private School Experience.
Okay.
In that episode, two former private school students, Brenda and Transcript the Truth, share their journeys. And it's really interesting how different their perspectives are.
Sounds like a great starting point. I'm curious to see what we can pull out.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
All right, so first things first. When people think private school, one of the first things that jumps to mind is academics.
Makes sense.
And actually, both Brenda and Transcript the Truth, they both talked about how much they valued smaller class sizes and the personalized attention they got from teachers.
Yeah, and research really does back that up. Smaller classes, more attention from teachers, they often lead to students being more engaged, and doing better academically.
Right? Makes sense. I guess it makes sense. So Transcript the Truth was really especially enthusiastic about the discussions they had in their classes,
How interesting.
especially history. It sounds like it was really engaging. And they even mentioned going on all these immersive field trips, like to historical sites.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, that hands-on approach can be so powerful.
Totally. But then later on in the episode, Transcript the Truth mentions this feeling of, feeling like a missing key socially.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it seems like even with all the good stuff about the academics, there was still this disconnect.
Yeah, like something was missing.
Exactly. And that brings us to another big part of private school life, extracurricular activities.
Right, sports clubs, all that.
Exactly. And both Brenda and Transcript the Truth, they talked about how many options there were, all these different clubs and sports teams.
Yeah, that variety is definitely often seen as a major. Plus, it lets students explore all sorts of interests, develop new skills.
Totally.
Yeah.
But Brenda pointed out that juggling all that, academics, extracurriculars, and then trying to have a social life on top of it all can get really demanding.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, she talked about how intense her volleyball practice schedule was, just as one example.
It's interesting how all those opportunities, while they're great, can sometimes lead to feeling this pressure, like you have to do everything.
For sure.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how private schools find that balance. Giving all these opportunities, but also making sure students aren't completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's a tough one, for sure. How do you support students' well-being at the same time?
Right. Okay, so let's move on to something that always gets people talking, the social scene at private schools.
Oh yeah, that's always a hot topic.
Brenda and Transcript the Truth both admitted that private schools can sometimes feel, well, kind of cliquey
Yeah, I've heard that.
and exclusive. Like it could be hard to fit in.
Yeah, for sure.
But here's where their experiences differ. Well, Brenda talked about making friends with students from different backgrounds and grades. Transcript the Truth had a much different experience.
Oh, so they didn't have that same positive experience.
Yeah, not really. They actually talked about feeling lonely and isolated.
Oh, wow.
They even said that watching other students have fun on the weekends made them feel like a missing key.
That's a powerful image.
It is, right? Like this feeling of not belonging.
Yeah, even in a place that's supposed to be, full of opportunity and privilege.
Exactly. It makes you wonder if that feeling came from, like, specific social dynamics at their school, or maybe even a bigger cultural disconnect.
It does, and it brings up a big question. Are private schools really doing enough to make everyone feel included and like they belong?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on to something I always find fascinating, the teachers.
Oh, yeah, they can make or break the experience.
Really. So Brendan talked about this literature teacher who really sparked her love of reading.
That's awesome.
It is, right? But then Transcript the Truth's experience takes a bit of a turn.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
First, they talked about this amazing science teacher who really encouraged their curiosity, which sounds great.
Yeah, sounds like a great teacher.
But then they suddenly shift gears and start listing specific teachers by name
Oh, wow.
and making some really harsh comments about each one.
Oh, that's unexpected.
Yeah, it was a really jarring contrast.
I wonder if that sudden shift in tone could mean something deeper, like a delayed reaction or something.
It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize how much our own individual perceptions can shape our memories of an experience.
For sure, even years later.
Right. What might be a positive memory for one person could be totally different for someone else.
Yeah,
Yeah, and-
absolutely. It shows how important it is to consider the full spectrum of experiences, when we're talking about any school environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, we can't talk about private schools without talking about the elephant in the room, the cost.
Yeah, definitely. Private school education comes with a big price tag.
It does. And that raises questions about who can actually afford it. The whole issue of accessibility.
Right, exactly. Is it really fair?
Transcript the Truth mentioned getting a scholarship, which helped, but they also pointed out that the financial differences between students can be really obvious.
And that's a big deal even within a school environment that seems really uniform.
Yeah.
Those financial differences can create social barriers.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's this random mention of Falcon College in Esigedini, Zimbabwe.
Wait, what?
It's so specific and it seems so out of place. It makes you wonder if it's connected to Transcript the Truth's experience somehow.
It's like a little mystery.
It is, right? Like a puzzle piece we need to figure out.
I'm definitely curious to see where that goes as we keep digging into this.
Me too. Okay, so that mention of Falcon College, it really got me thinking, like, what's the story there?
Yeah, it's like a little breadcrumb.
But before we go down that rabbit hole, let's circle back to Brenda and Transcript the Truth's advice for anyone thinking about going to or already in private school.
Right. What did they have to say to those folks?
Well, Brenda's advice was pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
She emphasized doing your research,
Yeah, makes sense.
visiting different schools, really thinking about the whole community, and if you'd fit in, not just like the academics.
Yeah, it's not just about the name or how high they rank.
Right. It's about finding a place where you can actually thrive.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Exactly, where your values and needs match up with what the school's all about. Now, Transcript the Truth had a slightly different focus.
Oh, yeah. What was their advice?
More for the students who are already in private school, they really encourage them to seize the opportunities,
Yeah, make the most of it.
Exactly. Don't just go through the motions, be proactive.
I love that. Because even in a structured environment, there's still room to take charge and shape your own experience.
Totally. And that's a message that goes beyond just school. It's about taking ownership of your experiences no matter where you are, at work in your relationships. It's about looking for the good and going for it.
So true. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into private school, what are some of the big takeaways we've gotten from Brenda and Transcript the Truth?
I think the most important thing is that private school is not a one-size-fits-all experience. It's a whole world with its own ups and downs, and those can be totally different depending on the person, the school, the social scene, you name it.
It's clear that personal stories, those really shape how we understand things like private school.
Yeah.
Brenda had mostly good things to say, while Transcript the Truth seemed to have some heavier negative emotions even years later.
And that just shows how important individual perception is. Even things that seem objective, like class size or what classes you take, those are all filtered through our own experiences, emotions, memories. What one student loves, another might hate.
Yeah, it's wild how those individual perceptions can totally color the whole story.
Yeah.
Both during the experience and after.
Yeah. It makes you wonder about the long-term effects of those years, especially when you have such different points of view. Are there things that stick with us that we don't really talk about?
That's a really interesting thought.
Yeah.
And, we've been focusing on the student's perspective, but the schools themselves play a huge role too.
Oh, absolutely. What are they doing to make everyone feel welcome to deal with financial differences, to actually create a supportive environment for every student?
Those are questions every school should be asking, private or public.
Totally. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to help all students thrive, not just academically, but emotionally and socially too.
I couldn't agree more. Now, throughout this whole deep dive, what really stood out to you about Transcript the Truth's experience?
Honestly, that moment when they started talking about teachers, that shift in tone,
Yeah.
it was so sudden. They went from praising the science teacher to listing other teachers and just tearing them apart.
Yeah, it was like a light switch flipped.
Yeah. It makes you think maybe there was something deeper going on, something they didn't express earlier in the conversation. Maybe there are a lot more people out there with experiences that don't match up with that perfect image of private school.
Right. Private schools are supposed to be all about opportunity and privilege, but
But that's not always the reality.
exactly. It's so easy to get caught up in those glossy brochures and perfect images. But behind all that, there are real stories. Some are amazing, some are really tough, and most are probably somewhere in between.
Yeah, it's easy to focus on the shiny surface and forget about all the different experiences people are having.
Absolutely. We get caught up in the rankings, the stats, those perfect stories they tell. But we got to remember, those are real people with real experiences.
And that's what this whole deep dive has been about. It's not about proving or disproving those private school stereotypes. It's about understanding how complex it really is by looking at real stories. Exactly. And when we hear those different perspectives, it helps us move past those simple judgments, We can start to have a more thoughtful, a more understanding conversation about education in general.
Brenda and Transcript the Truth, their conversation gave us a lot to think about. The academic pressure, the
Mm.
social scene, the teachers, the money. But we also dug into how much our own perceptions matter and how they shape the whole story.
For sure. It's been a really interesting journey. I hope this whole deep dive has made you think a little differently about things. Question those assumptions, look for different points of view, maybe even think about your own experiences with school.
Totally. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the reality of private school. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, and we hope you'll keep exploring these topics with us.
Yeah, definitely. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.